Welcome back, and we're going to finish up chapter 9 as we look at the area of attention. And just as a review, last time we met, we went over the 3 attention theories. So again, review these so that you're able to make clear distinctions between the 3 attention theories: the bottleneck or filter theory, the central resource capacity theories, and there's a specific one given, Kahneman's theory. And you remember that Kahneman's theory of attention is actually an example of the central resource capacity theory. And then the final one was the multiple resource theories, and Wickens was the model that we looked at. So again, go back, review those 3 approaches to how we look at the area of attention. Moving on now, let's look just of how we are able to measure or assess attention demands. And in the research, usually what they do is they'll provide a dual task procedure to determine how much attention you're paying at the same time to 2 different tasks. So in the dual task procedure, you have the primary task of interest. And so that would be the task you want to know how much attention you actually need in order to perform it. And then you're going to provide what they call a secondary task performance. And this will be a task that tries to interfere with your attention demands on the first task. And so they've done research to measure attention and demands, and as it relates to primary and secondary tasks. Moving on in the chapter, how we focus our attention. And basically, we can divide attention focusing into 2 different directions, if you want to look at them that way. The width of the focus. How wide do I focus? Do I have a broad focus or do I have a narrow focus? And also the direction of my focus. Do I focus externally or internally? And we know that as I focus my attention, it's always changing. It's changing from a broad to a narrow to a broad, at the same time from an internal to an external to an internal. So changing of our attention focus as we go about doing a variety of tasks. Here's just a illustration of the different attention focus that we do. Example, for the width, the broad to the narrow, and for direction, external, internal. So a broad external might be a quarterback who's assessing the situation he finds himself in, trying to find the open passer. That would be a broad external focus. Versus a narrow external focus might be basically a golfer who's focusing on the ball and the hole. That would be a narrow external focus. A broad focus, that would be internal, might be analyzing a plan or strategy for a game. That would be a broad internal focus. And then a broad or a narrow internal focus. A narrow internal focus might be getting mentally prepared to set up to do a specific shot. So those would be examples of the different ways we attend to information in our environment. Some interesting research in attention focus as it relates to movement versus movement effects. The question is, does an internal or external direction of focus really matter? Is one better than the other? And actually, there's a hypothesis called the action effect hypothesis by Prince, with the belief that there's a benefit of an external focus during performance. So in other words, as we focus on the intended outcome or the effects of the movements rather than the movements themselves, that's a better focus. Explaining it a little bit further, if I'm doing an internal focus, I'm going to break down the actual body movements, the coordination of those movements, the technique I want to focus on. In golf, it might be keeping my arms straight on my backswing, or keeping my knees bent. Again, that would be more of an internal focus versus an external focus where my direction, my attention is on the effect of my movement. So rather than the movement itself, I might focus on, if it's a golf swing, I might focus on the flight of the ball. And so this internal versus external focus, quite a bit of research out there on that, and kind of interesting. And the general conclusion is an external focus is better in most cases, especially if you're working with more experienced performers. Moving on with the idea of automaticity, when we're able to not to have to attend to the information so much because the movement is habitual or automatic. If it's automatic, then it doesn't take a lot of my attention in order to do the task. If you remember Kahneman's model, this would be when you evaluate the task demands, how much attention is required from you to do this task. And of course, to become automatic or habitual in the task performance, it's related to the amount of practice you put in. And interesting, they've measured brain activity when tasks are either automatic or not. And they found that different parts of the brain, in fact, are activated if you're doing a skill that is automatic for you, or if you're doing a skill that you're still practicing and it has not become a habitual type of pattern. So some interesting information there. Finishing up as we talk about visual attention, the last part of the chapter looks at how we visually attend to information. And again, visual attention selection deals with the direction and selection as I take in information visually in my environment, as I make a decision about attention demands. Visual search is what we do as we are scanning the environment, picking up visual cues from the environment to then make a decision about the type of action that is needed. So the area of visual attention in performing motor skills is an interesting one. They've studied it in a variety of ways. First of all, temporal occlusion of video or film, temporal meaning time, where they would show the participant a video clip of a skill, and then they would stop it somewhere along that time frame, and then the individual would have to decide what type of movement was going to occur. And they've also done that with spatial or event occlusion, where they show a video and maybe they mask or tape off part of the body to see if in fact there are certain parts or cues from the body that would help you be more successful in selecting cues in order to be good at a performance. So you have temporal time, you have spatial or event occlusion, and then they've also done research with eye movement recordings. And the problem with eye movement recordings is that it does not measure peripheral vision, and we know that peripheral vision does play a role as we attend to information and make decisions about certain movements. But anyway, those are the three ways that they have done research with visual selection attention. And if you're interested in learning more about that, I would recommend going to the chapter in the textbook that actually talks about visual selection and research in that area. So the question is, how do we select visual cues? What causes us to select visual cues? And one area that they have found is that we tend to look for the regulatory conditions in the environment and make decisions on that. And if you remember the term regulatory conditions, those are conditions in the environment that regulates our behavior. And so there's been studies that show that as we search information, we are taking in visual cues that helps us make determination of how to select a motor pattern. And Berkering and Neggers did that with the picking up an object and grasping an object, taking up regulatory cues to help us be successful in that. There's also the idea of what they call a feature integration theory, and you might see that I put that in blue, and it kind of pops out at you, right? So when we search, we tend to search for specific features. It might be a color, it might be a shape, and it kind of provides an attentional spotlight for us. In our textbooks, often you'll see something put in bold or big letters. That is to help us to visually attend to that information as being important. And then research done in what they call the quiet eye, which is basically that final moment just before you initiate movement. You're directing it at a location or an object. It could be considered a stable fixation of your gaze. Again, it happens right before you perform. And they have found that with elite performers, that quiet eye period is actually a longer duration. And again, the idea of quiet eye has been demonstrated in both closed and open motor skills. As we perform motor skills, we do have this process of visual search and deciding what we're going to pay attention to and what we're going to not pay attention to. In the textbook, there are several different scenarios given. So for a homework assignment for this part of the chapter, there's a worksheet to actually discuss how skilled performers versus novices engage in different visual search strategies. And that will be finishing up this chapter, and then you can turn that in for a homework grade. But it's interesting to note that expert performers versus novice performers do visually search and attend to information differently.